Will Uber get the green light in Melbourne?
And will you pay to make your home a Telstra smart home? Welcome to Vertical Hold, the tech show where we channel surf through the headlines in search of the big picture. I'm Alex Kidman, and I'm here with a man who wants to combine Uber with Airbnb to rent out his station wagon for the night, Adam Turner. Adam, what's new in tech?
Google is simplifying its two-factor authentication process by popping up a simple yes-no window on your smartphone when someone tries to log into your Google account, rather than texting you a one-time code. The extra security precaution makes it harder for hackers to break into your account, even if they know your login and password.
Survey results from the ABC's Vote Compass suggest that more Aussies favour the idea of spending more on the NBN bill to ensure a better overall network. Not surprisingly, this is strongest amongst Green and Labor voting respondents, but even in the LNP space, more than half thought it was a good concept.
Twitter and Vine users can now post longer videos to social media, with the services lifting their video clip limits to 140 seconds. Twitter will also act more like Vine, offering a full-screen viewing experience along with video suggestions below.
HP's issued a recall on batteries sold with a variety of its HP and Compaq branded laptops sold in Australia between 2013 and 2015. If the owner of an HP laptop bought in that time frame, it'd be wise to check with HP, as there's a risk of fire associated with some, but not all batteries supplied in that period. So Adam, Google is simplifying two-factor authentication. Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing?
I think it's a good thing. I think generally two-factor authentication is a good thing. It just makes it that bit, well, more than that bit harder for someone to hack into your accounts. A hacker might get your login and password because they've broken into a service or whatever. They go and put those details into Google, and Google says, "How do I know you're really you? I know what. I'll send a text message to your phone and you type in the code because I'm assuming you really have your phone." So what they want to change now, which is I think an improvement in several ways, is that instead of sending you the text message, although you'll still be able to opt for that, instead an app will just pop up on your phone or a window and say, "Hey, you just tried to log into a service from this account on this device in this location." Now, if that's you, just push yes. If you think it's some Russian hacker, then push no, and you'll never hear about it again.
I get that encourages the use of two-factor authentication. That's no bad thing in and of itself. I'm admittedly a little wary of it, though, in that it simplifies that process to a level where, for example, I could perhaps see malware exploiting it to simulate a yes click where it might have had to enter a passcode, for example. Or just that, you might idly, and I've certainly had this happen with some phones that are more sensitive to having the phone in your pocket and registering a thump of your thigh as being a tap on your phone. You might accidentally authenticate something that you had no idea about, whereas again, a code you're much less likely to randomly enter with your leg.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I'll admit that I haven't thought of that. That is a fair point. The reason why I think it's a good thing, though, is at the moment most people rely on text messages, and there are ways for hackers to get around that. And this is documented as happening. One thing that they'll do, particularly if they're trying to break into, we'll say, a business bank account, right? What they will do is transport your number to another service. Well, I can't remember the fancy name for that. So they get your phone number moved over to another SIM card and then get into your phone, into your bank account straight away. They get the two-factor authentication. They get in, and by the time you realize that your phone's not working anymore, they've already cleaned you out. Now, this is a documented thing that happens. The other thing is that there are weaknesses in the networking protocols, which mean there are ways, if you know what you're doing, to get at text messages. So to use this app rather than going through the text messaging system takes away that one extra security risk.
I suppose the practical lesson here is that unfortunately with these kind of systems, they will always be pushing at the limits of them to see if there are ways to get around this.
I think at the end of the day, it's a good thing if it encourages more people to use two-factor authentication, because while I don't find Google's system too difficult to use, for some people it would be that step too far. I know I can say to my less tech-savvy friends and relatives, here, switch this on, it'll be simple when it comes up, you just have to click one button. They're more likely to turn it on, which means they're less likely to get hacked, which means I'm less likely to get spam from hackers trying to give me crypto locker viruses by pretending to be my friend. So I see it as a win-win situation.
But how else am I going to score all my cheap Viagra if your account isn't telling me to?
This is true.
So, Adam, I live in Sydney, and here in Sydney, we can't stay out late anymore because of stupid state government lockout laws that basically say if you don't want to be at a casino, you're not really meant to be out past about 9:30. But at least if you do, you can catch an Uber home quite easily. Now, I understand that essentially the reverse is true in Melbourne, yeah?
Yeah, pretty much. We can go out and do whatever the hell we want. But if you jump in an Uber X, I think it is, there's always the risk that the driver will get fined because it ain't legal here. But it could be soon.
Criminal activity in Melbourne? When did this start?
Who would have thunk it? Yeah. So it has been legalised in some states of Victoria. Some states of Australia. It hasn't been in Victoria, but the big change that happened not so long ago was that an Uber driver's fine was overturned on appeal, which kind of set the precedent to say, okay, well, maybe you can do this. And now the Age newspaper is reporting that legislation is ready to be put to Parliament after the winter break, so when they come back in August, to make Uber legal in Victoria. And I would assume that probably, like some of the other states, it will come with a compensation package for the taxi industry, because while people like to bag taxis and say, oh, taxi's terrible and Uber's good, the thing is that the taxi industry actually did the right thing and paid for these expensive taxi licenses that they have. And so for the government to turn around and make these things practically worthless is not very fair without offering them some kind of a compensation deal.
Yeah, I mean, Uber's an interesting case because it's often held up as this kind of wonderful, democratic, cheap thing. Of course, it's not always the case. I mean, there will always, and for the next 10, 20 years, be a news story that runs on New Year's Day of somebody getting rorted from a late-night Uber drive because of the whole surge pricing model, for example. Uber, of course, is also admittedly looking very heavily into self-driving vehicles, so the career prospects for an Uber driver 10 years down the track might not be much unless they're willing to, shine a robot's shoes effectively.
And there are, I think Adelaide or South Australia has signed legislation to pave the way for autonomous vehicles. I'm not sure. I think the other states aren't there yet, but not far behind it. And I know that Uber's not the only one in Australia who's looking at that kind of technology as well in terms of these ride-sharing services.
It's also a fairly challenging environment, I think, for people who have very much a dependency on, let's call them hire vehicles, whether they're taxis or Uber or whatever, but with specialist needs. So if you are a wheelchair user or someone with some other form of disability, you've got a genuine need there, but there's not necessarily a model there that Uber particularly supports.
Yeah, I've seen research that says in some cities in the US that the rise of Uber has made it much more difficult for people who need, we'll say, like a wheelchair accessible car to get them. So that is something that the government needs to think about, particularly in Australia, all the changes we're making to things like public transport and stuff to make it accessible, to then forget about the fact that sometimes these people need to catch a taxi is not cool. All right, so Alex, Telstra's jumping in on the smart home bandwagon. They want to be your smart home provider. They want to take money from you every month to do what it looks to me at first glance like stuff that a lot of other people would do. Have you seen anything that would convince you that you want to lock yourself in as a Telstra customer just so you can be part of their smart home technology?
Look, I had a quick demo of Telstra's smart home stuff, and it seems perfectly reasonable, but as you say, it's very much the same kind of stuff that a lot of other providers are doing. So whether or not it makes sense, look, it's a little bit early to say that. While they formally launched it today, they're not actually going to make it available till closer to Christmas. So there's a bit of time in this stuff, and I'd want to actually sit down and test it and work out, hey, does this bit work, does that bit work? Because I've played with a fair amount of home automation stuff, and I think you've done a little bit yourself, where, they can make all the promises in the world, but then when you install it and you realise, well, hang on, when I close that door, the alarm always goes off, or the lights don't work, or the app's really slow, or whatever. It can be very hard to fully assess this stuff till you've lived with it for a bit. Certainly there's some approaches that they seem to be taking at this stage which I think are quite smart. They're basing it off Zigbee, which is a fairly open standard, and they've said that they are open to other platforms and approaches. So they're anticipating that, for example, they will support Apple's HomeKit standard when they launch, and that's smart for the large number of people who have iOS devices. They're open to other devices potentially becoming part of their system. Now, again, a lot of people have said this when they're launching stuff. Yeah. Quite how nicely they play with others remains to be seen.
Well, that's what I was going to say. And Telstra's report card doesn't usually have plays nicely with others written on it, does it? So I would be a little bit suspicious of going along with them. But the fact that you say that they're open to other platforms is what's really interesting to me, because I don't want to be locked in to the particular hardware specifically that they've got. I might see something from Apple that I like. I might see something from Belkin, the Wemo gear that I like. And if they offer me the opportunity to mix and match the gear that I want, and they will actually help it all nicely play together and give it a unified interface, then maybe I can see what they're bringing to the table.
Yeah, look, I think that will come a little later down the track. I suspect when they first start up, actually offering stuff to consumers, it'll probably be a locked set, because they've announced essentially two separate packages, one which is a little bit more home security, one which is a little bit more energy monitoring centric.
So what kind of gear, what sort of devices?
So they have door sensors and window sensors and cameras. They've got a door lock. They've got a home thermostat product, which they'll offer in various different packages. They do have some smart globes, which it appears they'll offer as standalone. But what's really interesting here, and you mentioned the lock-in thing, is the way that they're doing it, which in some ways is very smart if you're conscious of not wanting to invest heavily in gear, but in another way is very constraining. And it's the fact that they're not actually going to sell this stuff outright at all. So at the moment, if you wanted to get into Belkin's Wemo or Netgear's Arlo stuff, for example, then you pay a relatively high upfront cost. So to get a full suite of Wemo gear, you're into several $100s. Yeah. Arlo's very, very similar. Swan's got home security stuff as well, which is in the similar kind of price range. Telstra's not going down that path at all. Instead, they're going to do it all on a subscription basis, but they're going to do it on a 24-month contract. So you're going to sign up with them for 2 years, which is a long time in technology, but you're not actually making that high upfront cost. What they've said is that they anticipate their pricing, and whenever anyone says anticipate, it means we think this is what we'll do, but we'll do whatever we're going to do down the track. But they anticipate that their pricing will be about the cost of 2 movie tickets. Now, depending on whether or not you go to the scummy low-rent theatres or the high-end places that charge too much, that means you're going to pay anywhere between, say, what, $20
$40
to $50 a month for this stuff. Yeah. That also, though, includes a service layer, so there is actually some cloud-based smarts behind this which Telstra will run. I could see that having appeal for people, because whilst some of this home automation stuff is not super difficult to set up, a lot of it, I think, for ordinary consumers is a bit of a hard sell, because you're kind of saying, well, this talks to this and this talks to this and it's all network and it's Zigbee, and people are just going to go, well, what the hell's Zigbee and how do I... No, it's too hard. I don't want to know about it. And there's a lot of potential in this gear. So, I mean, in home automation generally, not specifically just Telstra's, there's a lot of potential in this gear for people to optimize their net connection and to do some really kind of cool stuff in terms of, letting the kids in when they get home from school, or having lights that follow you around the house at night when you go to the bathroom, that kind of stuff. And again, none of this is massively new or massively innovative on Telstra's part, but perhaps they can sell that, and they can sell that subscription package to people in a way that's more appealing, and an almost Apple-esque play. Not necessarily the first to market, but possibly the smoothest delivery. Well, that just about wraps it up for this episode of Vertical Hold. Remember, if you've got any comments, hit us up in the comments section on YouTube, via Twitter, or the Facebook Vertical Hold page.
Thanks for joining us, and remember, if you like what you hear, hit that subscribe button.